Alright, what's happening, everybody? So, welcome back to those of you that are coming back. Welcome to those of you that are here for the first time. Today we'll be reading Matthew chapter 27. I'm reading from the NLT, the New Living Translation. Also, I have the Geneva Bible, the 1560 edition that I used for references. So we finally came up to the crucifixion of Jesus and his death, right? This video also going to be longer, so there's a lot of this chapter is longer by itself, but also I'm going to be showing pictures and kind of explaining some of the things that happened, the tools were used for the crucifixion, prior to the crucifixion, and things of that nature. I'm not posting any of the actual imagery of what a person would look like during said punishments, I guess. Just the tools used, and I'll kind of describe what they do to a human body, which is pretty gruesome. One movie that I would recommend if you're interested to watch would be the Passion of the Christ, right? I've only seen that movie once, and it was many years ago, and it was probably enough for me to just watch it once for an entire lifetime. You see how truly terrible and gruesome it all was, right? Because once you read it, you can read it, but you don't really see it, you don't perceive it about how terrible it truly was. And I think that movie does a pretty good job of portraying of what actually happened, right? Maybe not entirely accurate to how it went 100%, but it is a rated R movie, and it is a rated R movie for a reason. But yeah, I would recommend some of you who are willing to watch it. Anyways, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. Matthew chapter 27. Very early in the morning, the leading priests and the other leaders met again to discuss how to persuade the Roman government to sentence Jesus to death. Then they bound him and took him to Pilate, the Roman governor. When Judas, who had betrayed him, realized that Jesus had been condemned to die, he was filled with remorse. So he took the 30 pieces of silver back to the leading priests and the other leaders. I have sinned, he declared, for I have betrayed an innocent man. Again, see here, so for one, yes, he's feeling kind of like the remorse, like, oh man, I kind of really messed up. I didn't realize he was going to get crucified. But again, here he mentions, I betrayed an innocent man, right? So he still, it hasn't clicked for him that this is the Messiah, that this is the Son of God. At least that's how it is led to be believed. What do we care? They retorted. That's your problem. Then Judas threw the money onto the floor of the temple and went out and hanged himself, right? Hung himself on a tree. The leading priest picked up the money. We can't put it in the temple treasury, they said, since it's against the law to accept money paid for murder. And after some discussion, they finally decided to buy the potter's field, and they made it into a cemetery for foreigners. Alright, so for one, a couple of things here. Here they're admitting that this money was paid for murder, was used for murder. For two, think about how much that money actually was valued, right? So it's 30 pieces of silver, but it was enough to go buy a whole entire field to make a cemetery, right, for foreigners. So it was a good chunk of change. Let's continue. That is why the field is still called the field of blood. This fulfills the prophecy of Jeremiah that says, they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price at which he was valued by the people of Israel, and purchased the potter's field at the Lord's direction. All right, so it is called the field of blood, and we'll learn it in one of the other gospels that it talks about that after he hung himself, once he died, he actually fell down and kind of like burst open to where his intestines were out, right? So it's to believe that he fell down from the height of the tree and fell on the way to where he got ripped open. That's why it's called the field of blood, but we'll read that in one of the other gospels. Let's continue. Jesus' trial before Pilate. Now Jesus was standing before Pilate, the Roman governor. Are you the king of the Jews? The governor asked him. Jesus replied, yes, it is as you say. But when the leading priests and the other leaders made their accusations against him, Jesus remained silent. Don't you hear there are many charges against you? Pilate demanded. But Jesus said nothing, much to the governor's great surprise. Now it was the governor's custom to release one prisoner to the crowd each year during the Passover celebration, anyone they wanted. This year there was a notorious criminal in prison, a man named Barabbas. As the crowds gathered before Pilate's house that morning, he asked them, "Which one do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" He knew very well that the Jewish leaders had arrested Jesus out of envy, because they tried and there was nothing that they could do, right? Nothing that would stick to actually, getting him to be crucified or to be killed by the Roman government, right? So he knew that they only did this out of envy. Just then, as Pilate was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent him a message. "Leave that innocent man alone, because I had terrible nightmares about him last night," talking about Jesus, right? So already he knows that Jesus is innocent, that he's only arrested here and wanting to be crucified because of the envy of the Jewish leaders, right? Religious leaders. Not only that, so he knows now his wife is telling him, leave this guy alone. Like, I had terrible nightmares, I had visions, dreams, whatever that she had about Jesus, right? So she's like, don't have anything to do with this. Meanwhile, the leading priests and other leaders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas to be released and for Jesus to be put to death. So when the governor asked again, "Which of these two do you want me to release to you?" the crowd shouted back their reply, "Barabbas." "But if I release Barabbas," Pilate asked them, "what should I do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" And they all shouted, "Crucify him." "Why?" Pilate demanded. "What crime has he committed?" Again, there's no legitimate crime for him to be put to death. But the crowd only roared louder, "Crucify him." So they don't have an explanation, they don't have a reasoning to actually bring it up to court, right? At this point, they're just forming in a mob and trying to overpower him with like words and stuff. Pilate saw that he wasn't getting anywhere and that the riot was developing, right? So a riot was happening on their hands, and Roman government did not like riots at all. And if you were in charge of the city or an area, right, if you were the governor of that area and there were a lot of riots and stuff like that, guess what? You're probably going to lose your job, and they're going to put somebody in there who's going to squash those riots pretty quick. So he didn't want that to happen, right? So he sent for a bowl of water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of the blood of this man. The responsibility is yours." Right? So I'm going to read from this little subsection here that kind of goes into a little further explanation, and I think it's kind of important to point out, right? So although he was convinced that Jesus was innocent and righteous, talking about Pilate bowed to public opinion and political pressure. Pilate was a classic example of someone in need of redemption who knew the right thing to do, but did not have the courage to follow through and risk angering others. Since it is impossible to please everyone all the time, we must make sure that what we are doing is honest and pleasing to God. We should be more concerned about sinning against God than about angering others, right? I think that was kind of a pretty important thing to point out here. All right, let's continue. And all the people yelled back, "We will take the responsibility for his death, we and our children." That's a tough statement to make when you're crucifying God. So Pilate released Barabbas to them. He ordered Jesus flogged with a lead-tipped whip, then turned him over to the Roman soldiers to crucify him. So here in the picture, I have the Roman whip, right, that they used. So it was a whip that had the lead tips, as you can see, the little lead balls at the end there. But also before that, they had animal bones that were woven into the whip, right? And the way that they would whip the person, when it would strike, it would actually grab into the flesh and it would peel everything off, right? So it would rip skin, rip the meat, rip all the tendons, the muscles, the fatty tissues, everything that was attached, right? And that's what he was getting whipped with. And it wasn't just one whip. As you can see, there are several whips on that single whip. So with every strike, you're ripping out meat, you're ripping out muscle, tendons, whatever, right? But you can only imagine what a human body would look like after such a whipping, right? Pretty much all of the rib cage exposed, most likely in the back, right? Many other different pretty terrible injuries caused from that. All right, so let's continue now. Some of the governor's soldiers took Jesus into their headquarters and called out the entire battalion. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. They made a crown of long, sharp thorns and put it on his head, and they placed a stick in his right hand as a scepter. Then they knelt before him in mockery, yelling, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they spit on him and grabbed the stick and beat him on the head with it. When they were finally tired of mocking him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him again. Then they led him away to be crucified. So the reason why they used the scarlet robe, right, is because the color scarlet back in the Roman times would represent like royalty, right, something that a Caesar or the governors would wear and stuff like that. So they put it on him as mockery. And then the thorns, the crown of thorns that they put on him, right, it's not just something that's going to sit on you. Those thorns would dig into your scalp, cut all the way through as they pushed it down, right, digging into your skin, all around your head, all around your top of your head. Obviously, even more excruciating pain, bleeding all over the place. And then they took the stick, right, and they didn't just stab him. And it's not one of those sticks that was probably laying around for a couple of years that as soon as you hit it, it just disintegrates and falls apart, right? I'd assume if it's a stick that they used as a scepter, right, imagine like a cane, pretty hardy, sturdy wood, right, probably treated with something. And they didn't just tap him on the head, they said they beat him on the head with it. Again, more and more spitting on him, all this beating. You can only imagine how terrible all this is. The crucifixion. As they were on the way, they came across a man named Simon, who was from Cyrene, and they forced him to carry Jesus' cross. Alright, so then they went out to the place called Golgotha, which means Skull Hill. The soldier gave him wine mixed with bitter gall, but when he had tasted it, he refused to drink it. Alright, so as you can see here, Jesus was at such a hard shape. So a lot of the people actually never even made it to the crucifixion because they would die prior to them ever even being crucified, right? You can see why, due to such beatings and stuff like that. So when Jesus was walking, he was literally like fainting and falling over. So they made this dude named Simon to pick up the cross for Jesus. Just a random guy in a crowd. His name was Simon. They made him pick up the cross and carry it for Jesus the remainder of the way, because he was in such a terrible shape that he couldn't even do that, right? And then this gall, right, with bitter gall. So I didn't know what it was, so I looked it up. Gall, in a literal sense, is bitter yellow-green fluid produced by the liver, also known as bile. Or another version of it is the venom of a snake, right? And then, not in the literal translation, it would mean something like bitterness, sorrow, painful consequences of sin, right? So if they're saying that it was wine mixed with bitter gall, you would assume that it's this yellow-green fluid produced by the liver, also known as bile, or it was snake venom mixed in with the wine, right? And that's what they were trying to give him to drink, right? Continuing the mockery, continuing the gruesomeness of the whole entire situation. After they had nailed him to the cross, the soldiers gambled for his clothes by throwing dice. Then they sat around and kept guard as he hung there. A signboard was fastened to the cross above Jesus' head, announcing the charge against him. It read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." So the sign was actually written in 3 different languages, and we'll learn about it in one of the other Gospels. So that pretty much anybody from the different regions around that area could come and see what it was written. Also, I want to point out verse 35. So verse 35 in here just reads, "After they had nailed him to the cross, the soldiers gambled for his clothes by throwing dice." Right? In the Geneva Bible, it goes into a little bit further of detail. Right? So it says, "And when they had crucified him, they parted his garments and did cast lots, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophets. They divided my garments among them, and upon my vesture did cast lots." Right? So it was predicted by the prophets that this was going to happen, that they're going to divide the garments and cast dice to see who's going to get what of his clothing. All right, that's one of the things that I want to point out. Let's continue here. After they had nailed him to the cross, the soldiers... Oh, I already read that. 2 criminals were crucified with him, their crosses on either side of his. And the people passing by shouted abuse, shaking their heads in mockery. So, you can destroy the temple and build it again in 3 days, can you? Well then, if you are the Son of God, save yourself and come down from the cross. The leading priests and the teachers of the religious law and the other leaders also mocked Jesus. He saved others, they scoffed, but he can't save himself. So he is the King of Israel, is he? Let him come down from the cross, and we will believe him. He trusted God. Let God show his approval by delivering him. For he said, I am the Son of God. And the criminals who were crucified with him also shouted the same insults at him. So I want to point this out, right? So in the gospel, and I'm going to read Luke to you right now real quick. The gospels, the 4 gospels, they're all written by 4 different individuals, right? And everybody either was there and saw what actually happened, or they heard it from other people. So here that says that the criminals who were crucified with him also shouted the same insults, right? So Matthew writing this, he probably heard it from whoever witnessed it at that time, that the criminals were shouting insults at him. In Luke, however, it is written in Luke 23, verse 39 through 43, right? So let's go 39 through 43. One of the criminals saying besides him scoffed, So, you're the Messiah, are you? Prove it by saving yourself, and us too while you're at it. But the other criminal protested, Don't you fear God even when you're dying? We deserve to die for our evil deeds, but this man hasn't done anything wrong. Then he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus replied, I assure you, today you will be with me in paradise. Right? So one of the guys actually did confess that Jesus is God, right? And asked him, please allow me to be in your kingdom with you. And Jesus said, I assure you, today you will be with me in paradise. So that's one of those things that it doesn't matter if it's your last moments, right? It's never too late to turn to God. But also don't wait until your last moment, because you don't know when your last moment is going to be. But it is never too late to turn to Jesus. All right, that's one of the things that I wanted to point out. We're going to continue reading here. Like I said, this is going to be a long video. At noon, darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock. At about 3 o'clock, Jesus called out with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, my God, why have you forsaken me? Right? So, you have to understand that God the Father hates sin. Right? That is why that is why the Jewish people had to constantly do sacrifices in order to pay for their sins with blood, right? Jesus had to come here to be the final sacrifice for all of our sins forever, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life, right? So when he's yelling out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Or Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, right? At that moment, that's when Jesus took on the sins of the entire world, right? And since he had all the sin of everybody, of you and me, upon himself, God turned away from him, right? Because God hates sin. So he turned away from sin. He turned away from his son. And I believe that is why he's saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you turned away from me? Right? I think that's personally pretty powerful. Anyways, let's continue. Some of the bystanders misunderstood and thought he was calling for the prophet Elijah. One of them ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, holding it up to him on a stick so he could drink. But the rest said, leave him alone. Let's see whether Elijah will come and save him. All right, another thing about this stick and wine and the sponge. I watched this video many years ago, and this guy explained what this actually was. So back in the day, especially in big cities, right, when people would go to the bathroom, they wouldn't have toilet paper, dude wipes, baby wipes, whatever you want, right? So what they had for public bathrooms is they had these buckets, with wine in them, or not with wine, with vinegar in them, right? That after you go to the bathroom, you would take the stick that had the sponge attached to it, you would dunk it into the vinegar, which would disinfect it, right? You would clean yourself off in the back there, in order to clean it off, right? And then you would put it back. So that individual that was doing that research, he believes this is the stick and the sponge that was used to give to Jesus, right? Which is further humiliation. Like, my goodness. All right, let's continue. Then Jesus shouted again, and he gave up his spirit. At the moment, the curtain in the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom. The earth shook, rocks split apart, and the tombs opened. The bodies of many godly men and women who have died were raised from the dead after Jesus' resurrection. They left the cemetery, went into the holy city of Jerusalem, and appeared to many people. Right? Several important things there. For one, there's documentations that say that they have seen a lot of these people that were dead throughout Jerusalem after Jesus' resurrection. That's one of them. For two, do you remember in the previous video there was a temple? I showed you a picture of the temple. There was a place of Holy of Holies, right, which is where the God's Spirit resided, and there was a giant veil that separated the Holy of Holies from the holy place, which is where the priests were able to do whatever it is that they needed to do for their priestly duties. But that veil separated God's presence from the rest of the world. So when Jesus shouted out again and gave up his spirit, that veil tore. Right, and it tore from the top to the bottom, to where no human could rip it from the bottom, right? It tore from the top to the bottom. Now that separation that was between us and God has now forever been torn. Another huge, such an important thing, right? Now, through Jesus, we're able to go directly to God. There's nothing separating us from God, right? Very, very important, right? Also, one interesting thing that I found, that I learned, I think it was probably about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. So when the darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock, right? So for 3 hours there was darkness. It's actually recorded in one of the Chinese old religions that for whatever reason there was darkness that fell on the land for 3 hours, and they don't know what happened. They just recorded that there was darkness and that something has shifted in the world, right? They don't know, but I found it pretty interesting. If I could remember the video or who did the research, I would let you guys know, but I don't. So I guess just take my word for it or don't. All right, let's continue. The Roman officer and the other soldiers at the crucifixion were terrified by the earthquake and all that had happened. They said, truly, this was the Son of God, right? So now you have the Roman officers and the soldiers who are, this was the Son of God, right? Admitting it. And many women who had come from Galilee with Jesus to care for him were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and Zebedee's wife, the mother of James and John, right? So real quickly, now we're going to go into the crucifixion. So I'm going to I'm going to put a bunch of pictures here for you guys to see where the actual where the nails went through, right? So some people believe that it went through the palm, right? But the issue with the palm is that it would probably tear through the skin because of how you had to be hanging, right? So possibly tear between the fingers. That's why they think that the nail was put into the wrist, right? Where the two bones from your forearm connect to the wrist area. So right through here, to where once you're hanging, right? If you're hanging down, it's not able to just rip through, because it's not like you have anything else really supporting it. And then you have the picture of the feet, right? So they believe the feet were stacked together like this, and then the nail driven through both of the feet into the wood. One of the terrible things, and it's not mentioned in here, it's mentioned in John 19, verse 31 to 37, which I'll read to you guys, right? It's talked about, for one, the people would die literally. So imagine hanging there just by those 3 points, right? You're vertical, you're on that cross, And the issue is that you're going to start kind of suffocating, right? That's why it took a long time for people to die on the cross. Well, usually several days, but it takes several days for people to die, because eventually you're going to lose strength of trying to pull yourself up. Again, you're not pulling yourself up by your muscles or whatever, right? You have 2 nails in your hands, and if you pull up with your hands, it's excruciating pain, right? And then if that's too excruciating and you're too tired and you start slumping back down, and to where your chest cavity is starting to kind of collapse on itself and getting hard to breathe, right? You would try to push off with your feet. But then what's in your feet? You have another nail in your feet. More excruciating pain going through your body trying to push up just so that you can breathe a little bit better, right? So I'm going to go now into John 19, verse 31 through 37. And it kind of describes a little bit more of what happens. Right, so the Jewish leaders didn't want the victim hanged there the next day, which was the Sabbath. And a very special Sabbath that, at that, because it was the Passover. So they asked Pilate to hasten their deaths by ordering their legs to be broken. So the reason why their legs would be broken whilst they're hanging on the cross is that it would take out the power of them to use their legs to push up to breathe better, right? So their legs will be broken, now they're useless. So not only do you have a nail through your feet, now your legs are broken, you can't push up, so you pretty much end up suffocating faster. Their bodies, their legs would be broken, then their bodies would be taken down. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the 2 men crucified with Jesus. But when they came to Jesus, they saw that he was dead already. So they didn't break his legs. One of the soldiers, however, pierced his side with a spear, and blood and water flowed out. So the reason why water flowed out is because due to him already being dead, right, there's no circulation of the blood, so the water started to collect. And that's what came out, blood and water. This report is from an eyewitness giving an accurate account. It is presented so that you can also believe, so you also can believe. These things happen in fulfillment of the scriptures that say, not one of his bones will be broken, and they will look on him whom they have pierced. Right, so that's from John 19, verse 31 through 37. Long video, guys, I told you. Let's continue. The burial of Jesus. As evening approached, Joseph, a rich man from Arimathea, who was one of Jesus' followers, went to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body, and Pilate issued an order to release it to him. Joseph took the body and wrapped it in long linen cloth. He placed it in his own new tomb, which had been carved out of the rock. Then he rolled a great stone across the entrance as he left. Both Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were sitting nearby watching. And it kind of goes into a little bit more detail in the other books, which we'll cover later. The guard at the tomb. The next day, on the first day of the Passover ceremonies, the leading priests and the Pharisees went to see Pilate. They told him, "Sir, we remember that the deceiver once said while he was still alive, 'After 3 days I will be raised from the dead.' So we request that you seal the tomb until the 3rd day. This will prevent his disciples from coming and stealing his body and then telling everybody he came back to life. If that happens, we'll be worse off than we were at first." Right? Pilate replied, "Take guards and secure it the best you can." So they sealed the tomb and posted guards to protect it. Alright, that's it for chapter 27, you guys. Thank you so much for sticking around for this long. Hopefully you found this chapter very meaningful and actually got something out of it. Anyways, I love you guys. God bless you and your families. And I hope I see you in chapter 28. Take care.